Hello everybody, my name is Mikael Blomberg. I'm a Swedish-talking Finn. You probably heard of us before. There's another guy that's quite famous. His name is Linus. I don't know him personally, but we're both Swedish-talking Finns, so I thought it would be a good thing to remind everybody about that in the beginning. I worked for a company called SC5. It's founded in 2006. And at the moment we have like 50 people working there. We have two offices, one here in Jyväskylä, in Innova 2. It's a building somewhere like over there. And then in the Kamppi we have the main office. And we have some big clients that are listed, and we're specialized in HTML5 application development. And that is one of the topics for today. But before I go into that, I would like to know a little bit about you. The first thing I would like to know, let's do this by raising hands. So everyone that is familiar with MVC, please raise your hand. Good. Everybody that has done web development, please raise your hand. Great. How about Ajax? Did you use that? Okay, so you've done it fairly recently. That's good. Do you master closures? Okay, good. Do you master anonymous self-executing functions? Good. Then the last one. Do you contribute some JavaScript open source software? One. Great. Then the ones that know this, you can probably just leave because there's not going to be anything new. But if you want to see the show, please stay. You can help the others, and you can make really good questions for me. So what I would like you to do is every time you get a question, raise your hand, interrupt me, feel free to do that. There's no point for me to go on to the next slide, or, well, in the worst case, go to the end and then you ask me, what was that thing called MVC, which was the first slide. So please feel free to ask at any time. And the topic for today is structuring the JavaScript client with MVC. So this lecture is going to have 4 topics, and this is my very fancy visualization of that. I use these boxes. They're not rounded corners, they're squared boxes, but it has gradient. So it's a little bit better than the modern UI by Windows. And let's start with MVC. That is architectural design that has gotten very many interpretations, and I'm not going to go very deeply into that. You might have a different opinion about what it means, but in the most simplest case, which is the one I'm going to present, I think we can agree on. So this is what it looks like. We have a controller, we have a model, and we have a view. We start with, well, whichever we like, but usually we start with the model because that's data, it's easy to understand. We need to put everything related to that data somewhere, and that's the model. And when it changes, we update the view. The view is the presentation layer, so everything that is in the model and we want the user to see, we put in the view. Then when the user interacts with your system, it gives input, and that input goes to the controller, which contains the logic for how you modify or alter the view. So what we need is smart models, thin controllers, and dumb views. This design was developed in 1978 by Trygve Renskaug, and he did it for Smalltalk. So this pattern, or should we say design, is 34 years old, but it still applies, and we kind of mold it to fit our needs. Any questions? Nope. Okay. Let's go to the model. The model is the object representing the data. And of course, we want everything related to that data to be in this same part. That's behavior. But we don't want to mess something else into that. We don't want it to know anything about views. We don't want it to know anything about the controllers. We want the data to be isolated. But because it needs to be connected somehow, let's use the observer pattern. How many is familiar with the observer pattern? Okay, I'm not going to go in deeply into that, but the idea is that you observe something else. And when something happens to that thing you're observing, you can react to that change. That's the observer pattern, briefly. So the model updates the view, and the model is modified by the controllers. Then let's look at the view. It's what the user sees. It's a visual representation of the model state. It's aware of the model, because otherwise it couldn't react on anything, and also it needs to know something about the model in order to present that information. And I put that logicless there because that's the thing about views. If you make it contain a lot of logic, then it won't work so well, because the idea behind this separation is that you can exchange views. You can have multiple views, and in an ideal world you would use the same model and controller. Some cases you need different controllers, so often views and controllers goes in pairs, but it's not necessary, and the main idea is that we're trying to decouple it as much as possible. And to decouple these two, we use the observer pattern. They're not dependent on each other strongly. So the view observes the model and passes the input from the user to the controller. And the controller is pulling all the strings, and it's changing the model according to the input, and it contains the view logic. And as these other two, it's also implementing the observer pattern, which means that it observes the state and modifies the model. So these go nicely round and round and round. This is just one way of presenting this. There are many others. The same basic principles apply. The idea is to separate the concerns. Oiva talked about that a lot. We need to clearly structure our components, and that can be used with these three abstractions. And then if you're able to decouple them, then you can do concurrent development. What that means is that you can have a UX designer doing the view, then you can have a JavaScript developer do the controller, and then you can have a database guy doing the model, so that you have three persons working on each part, and these are going to work nicely together if you have a clear structure. And then, of course, you can reuse the code. If you have models with the same elements, they can use the same view and controller. If you have a model that needs two ways to represent it, you can just have two views. And if a view needs separate logic parts depending on let's say the model state, then you can have two of those. A good example of two views you could use is a mobile view and then a desktop view. I don't recommend it, but that's possible. And then an example where you have two controllers, that would be a normal user and then an administrator, which has the right to modify the model. And if you separate these components, then you get much better maintainability, because you can trace the problems and you know where you have to go to change something. And when you know this, you'll develop much faster. You're going to write more code, because you don't need to figure out where is this part going to go. Now I want to change this. Where should I put it? How does that sound? You're way too silent. I can almost hear a pin dropping. Usually that's good, but this is getting scary. You should be more involved. You should ask questions. Is this like crystal clear to everyone? Great. I'll just take out this test form and distribute it to everybody, and we can see about that. No, just kidding. But please remember, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. Now we're moving on. The next part is what has happened during the last few years. We have the traditional web backend and web pages. You do when you navigate to the next page, you do a full page reload, and then you get all the JavaScript again, all the CSS again, and everything. And then you go on for that, like that, all the time. Then came Ajax, which is a way to get the data in parts. And then that has been refined to what you can see here on the right side. That you have a backend with a REST API, the stuff I was talking about 2 weeks ago. And then in the front end, you have a HTML5 single page app, which has page transitions and changes without doing a full page reload. And this single page app structure also means that there's much more possibilities for you as a developer. For instance, nowadays there are a lot of more devices out there which have different screen sizes, and for that there's responsive design. That lecture wasn't held last week, but hopefully it will be in the future, so I'm not going to go very deeply into that topic. But this is the big picture. This is the future. But let's go back to what I was talking 2 weeks ago. Do you remember this? REST APIs. It's separated client server. It's stateless. You can cache it. It means it scales. No, sorry, caching means it doesn't have the state, and it doesn't really matter where data comes from. And then layered system means it scales, and then you have a uniform API. It's all structured the same way so that you can access it easily. And then one of my favorite slides from Oiva's representation. Because as a front-end developer, we don't really care how the REST API is implemented, as long as it works. That's all that matters. We want our data out of there, and well, it can be a unicorn for all I know. It's kind of magical anyway. And this is what we're using to access the data. Some browsers don't support all of these, but then we just emulate them. Put and delete is a post request which is decorated, and then we can still use CRUD. It's a nice way to get the data from the database and manipulate it and such. And there's frameworks that implement this out of the box. One of them is Backbone.js. We're gonna look into Backbone later on. So that was the topic on MVC. Yes, please do ask.
What is the state of the art with the that emulation of multi-limit HTTP verbs? Is that the underscore minimum variable, or?
The question was, what is the state-of-the-art way of emulate the HTTP request? Yes, it's using the underscore method to emulate them.
Okay, that's going to work like all around.
Of course, you should look forward. You should support the old browsers, but you should also support the browsers that are implementing all the functionality. So in real life, you'll have code that is structured in a way so that the requests that go to put and delete also respond to these emulated post requests. So what you're doing in the backend is you're just rerouting the post request depending on which implementation it has to use. So let's talk about JavaScript. This is a nice topic because JavaScript is quite misunderstood. How many of you have been doing JavaScript development in the last 2 years? 5 years? 10 years? Okay, then you know it has changed a lot. In the early days, JavaScript wasn't so easy to use. That was mainly because browsers were implementing different features, some features were broken, and so on. But JavaScript in itself is a nice language. It's object-oriented, and that means everything is an object. Okay, there are these native objects like numbers, integers, oh, actually I should say floats, and then strings are native types. But everything is an object, and it's dynamic, so even if it would be if it wasn't an object but a native type, then it will be translated when it's used. And it's weakly typed, so if you have something that looks like a string, then it's used as a string. Another weakly typed language that I think Python is weakly typed, not sure. But strong type languages are like Java and C, where you have to say that this variable is of type this. Then the cool thing about JavaScript is that functions are first-class citizens. And first-class citizens means that functions can be passed around as arguments. So you can do a function that is accepting a function as an argument. Or you can make a function that is returning a function. Now this allows us to do interesting stuff. And then there's inheritance. It's prototypal. Prototype-based inheritance is quite rare. I think there's 2 languages that I know of that implement that type of inheritance. It's Self and JavaScript. All the other object-oriented languages which has inheritance uses classes. And then we have anonymous functions and closures. Anonymous functions, that's kind of self-explanatory, but the idea is that you can create functions that are without names. And then every time that you make a function, the environment is in that closure. So what happens is that when you state function A and then give a bunch of parameters and start the statement, all the variables in that scope is accessible inside of the function. And even if the function becomes out of scope, it's still accessible to the variables that are defined before it. I don't expect you to fully comprehend that, but it's one of the advanced features of the language, and closures is coming into all major languages, even Java. So there's a definite need for this encapsulation of the state. JavaScript is single-threaded. That is, it makes life easier because you know that when I'm executing this line, nothing else can happen at the same time. Of course, it also means that you can't do many things at the same time, so you need to be careful. If you have some complicated algorithms, it might make the user interface freeze. And that's where web workers come in. That's a way to do non-blocking executions, and asynchronous calls also allows us to be non-blocking. And the fact that JavaScript can be written as non-blocking is the reason why Node.js has been developed. It's JavaScript in the server, which is actually quite performant. JavaScript is a fast language. When you think about it, it doesn't make sense because everybody says JavaScript is slow. But the fact is, it's not JavaScript that is slow, it's the next part. It's the client. And in this case, the web browser is the client. And the reason why JavaScript engines or JavaScript in general are considered slow is because of the document object model. We all know that web pages are HTML. So when the browser is asking for a page, it's getting this hypertext markup language page, and then it's parsed to a document object model tree. Now this transformation is kind of slow, and it's also interactive. And that means that if you have a variable pointing to something in the document object model, and then you change something, everything else changes as well. And because this dynamic nature of the DOM, executioning of JavaScript might become slow. And that's why people call JavaScript slow. But it's not the language that is slow, it's just the environment. So the JavaScript engines are quite fast. You probably know about V8 and IronMonkey. I think IronMonkey was the engine Firefox is using at the moment. And the JavaScript support is quite good among browsers. They don't vary much. The difference is mainly in speed. The layout engine, as I explained earlier, it's handling the HTML, CSS, and produces the DOM. And this is the pain point. And to ease out these pain points, libraries such as jQuery has been developed so that you can kind of abstract that away, because some browsers implement stuff in different ways than others, and some do a better job than others, and so on. So that's why jQuery is a good library to abstract away the browser. And then we have the acid tests to measure standards compliance. And acid tests are really good because you know based on them what features work and which doesn't. And testing in general is becoming a standard in in the community. HTML5, for example, it has a really big test suite, and that's why the work on HTML5 is quite slow at the moment, because they need to do all these tests, and then they need to evaluate that the tests are working, and if they find some problems regarding the test, then they revise the tests and revise the specifications, and there's a lot of work with that. But as Matti said in his presentation, it's a living standard, and they're gonna go forward piece by piece. So we're safe on that point. And then let's talk about structure. Because we have already talked about MVC, JavaScript, the client, the structure part is going to be using the previously mentioned things. We're going to talk about JavaScript MV star frameworks. The reason I'm calling them MV star is because these aren't exactly MVC frameworks. They have the same ideas, but they're not implemented exactly in the way that MVC was done originally. So this is just a few frameworks I picked out. Backbone is one of the most popular ones. AngularJS is interesting. It's based on HTML when the other ones are more JavaScript based. It's a cool thing. If the browser doesn't support JavaScript, then it might not work so well. Then we have Knockout.js, which is a MVVM model using framework. MVVM is the framework that Microsoft is using. So if you're familiar with Microsoft technology, then Knockout.js is something you should look at. But let's take a look at Backbone.js. As I mentioned, it's a MV star framework, and let's take the things we already know. We know the model, it's the data, and in Backbone the model is still the data, it hasn't changed. Then let's take the familiar view. Now this is just what we decide to call things. The logic and the functionality, the responsibilities, they all stay there. So everything you expect a view to contain based on this presentation, it's going to be in this part. It's a dump view. So it's what you can see, it's the presentation layer. But in Backbone we call it a template. And now we're gonna go deeper. Then we have this controller thing. Its responsibility is to handle the logic, but we're not gonna call it controller because that would be way too easy for you. So let's call it a view. Because it contains the logic of the template. So it's the equivalent of a controller. Then because we're in an environment where we have lots of data, it's sometimes useful to have a more specific way to access all of that data. And that's why there are collections. We're going to check into that later, but it's basically a managed set of models. And the REST API is going to give you that data for the model and the collection. And then the controller kind of goes to the router. some of the responsibilities of the controller we can put in a router. And that's what we have. When you have a URL, it goes into the router, and then the view takes a model, takes a template, and then it slowly goes to the DOM, because the DOM was slow. And that's how web pages are done. So let's take a look at the router. This is exactly the same thing as happens in the backend. You get a URL, and then you find out the view to handle that URL, and the router is managing the application's state. The reason why it's based on the URL is because then you can bookmark it. It's easy to share bookmarks with friends, and then they will see the exact same application state as you. The router will simulate page changes, and it will manage the history for you. In the example, we're going to look at that more closely. And then I thought it would be nice if I could show you a small example. The router is just an object. I decided to call it app router. It can be called anything. This is just the way Backbone decided to do inheritance, router.extend. And then in this example we have a router to get authors, and then, well, you can basically just put anything there and it will go to the default. And then when we initialize the function, the object, then we're just gonna put this web app thing in a variable, and then I've hidden the show author because it would have become too long for showing you this, but then I have some logging to make it easier for the presentation, and then a bit of logic how the view is actually rendered and how the model is gotten. So that's the router. Now, any questions? Everything is still crystal clear? Great. Then let's take a look at the view. The view is responsible for adding event listeners to the DOM. So this is the thing that is controlling the user interface. It contains the logic, and it modifies the model based on user interaction. And this is what C is in MVC, but we just call it view so that you would be confused. And then it renders the model using a template. Let's take a brief look at this. We have the template there, then we have a render function, and then we have access to the model. Let's look at the model. Is representing the data. It includes everything that is related to that: getters, setters, conversions, validation, and then it has functionality as fetch and save for data persistence. Fetch is the way we're accessing the REST API to get the model from the server. And if you modify the model, you can persist it using save. And of course it has a lot of more functionality as well, but you can check that out from the documentation. And this is a simple model. We have default values, then we have the URL to the REST API, and then we have a validation. You can put there almost anything you need. So the model is usually not, well, we want a smart model, so it has to contain everything regarding to that model. But this is a nice abstraction. And then we have a collection. It's an ordered set of models. It's ordered because you can define how it's ordered. And you use the same REST API as Oiva showed to you 2 weeks ago, and that's a way to populate the collection. And then a nice feature of the framework is that if a model in a collection changes, then the collection also gets the event. And then a collection provides all underscore functions. Underscore is another JavaScript library. Its main features is to efficiently manipulate arrays and objects. And that's what you usually do in collections, so it's a nice fit. And this is what a collection looks like. It has the same root URL as the model, and then this get by ID is not necessary. I just had to figure out something to put there, but you can get the same functionality by using get and then just giving the actual parameter. And then here's a comparator, which is used to order the models in the collection. And then let's take a look at the template. It's kind of far away from the view in this presentation. It has some good characteristics because the template can be done by a designer, and usually it might be a good idea to put it outside of the JavaScript function, JavaScript, what should I call it, folder perhaps, yes. You have a separate folder for assets like a template and styles, and then you have another folder for JavaScript, the models, the views and collections and the router. And the template, it's just HTML. So if you use HTML in your application, put it in a template. If you want to style that HTML, put it in a CSS file. Try to avoid putting logic in the template. With logic, I mean something that it's a bit more difficult than just conditionals and loops. That means if sentences and for loops. Because if you put logic in the template, and I urge you, do not do that, you're gonna put logic in a place where it doesn't belong, and then if somebody else comes along, they have to use a lot of time to figure out where this logic is, and when they finally find it, they need to change it without breaking anything else. And depending on what you're accomplishing there, it might be a very difficult thing. So please do not put JavaScript functions in templates. Of course, if you have a valid reason to do that, feel free to do it, but I urge you to resist the temptation, because, well, it's gonna be fast and easy now, but, well, in a week or two when you've forgotten what it exactly does and you need to modify it, you're not gonna remember it. So put that stuff in the view instead. And then the template is inserted into the DOM. And this is a short example of a template. It's just HTML, nothing special. This template is implemented using the micro-templating system in Underscore, which comes with Backbone. But you can use any templating engine you like. Because it's November, I would recommend Mustache. That was a joke, guys. Come on, be alive. There's like one question in all the presentation. It cannot be that clear. Well, anyway, Mustache is a good library. It's supported on almost every environment there is. So if you're doing back and front end development with languages that are not compatible with each other, then Mustache is a good way to share templates between the backend and the front end. And then, of course, we have some CSS. Not much. I could have done more, but I was doing this like in the middle of the night, so I didn't find it so important to make it look good. So this is what Backbone.js gives us. It gives us a router so that we can handle application state. It gives us a view so that we can manage the presentation layer. We use models and collections to get the data we want to present, and then we have templates for the markup, and then we put it into the DOM. So the benefits of using a framework: any framework is good for making modularity. You want to have modules so that you can reuse those modules and separate the code from each other. And also, if you have modules, you kind of force yourself to think about, where does this belong? Does this really belong to this module I want to put it in? And if you notice, hey, this thing is kind of envious of the data over there in that module, it should probably not be where it's placed at the moment. So everything something needs should be in the same module. And then you have different ways to communicate with the other modules. In Backbone, that's events. Backbone is event-driven. And browsers in general are also event-driven. Backbone has a good documentation. It has annotated source, and then the API is well documented, and you find a lot of examples using Google, for example. And then it has out-of-the-box REST API support. That's a big thing, because you can waste hours and hours on making that communication layer work. So it's nice to have something that you just build a REST API according to the way Oiva was talking about, and then it just works. Backbone is web browser independent. It's JavaScript, so it just works. It's kind of small. It has one hard dependency, and that's underscore, which was the function, the library for handling different arrays and objects. And then usually you use jQuery to access the DOM. You can use Ender as well, or Zepto. You can use any framework you like. And Backbone is a popular framework, and it's usually used to build single-page apps. It has a large community, and it's used in production. Backbone is also quite mature, so there aren't a lot of bugs anymore in it. It's not 1.0 yet, but it's 0.92, so it's getting there. And then let's take a look at some code. Now this is the wild part, because I had no idea how this is going to work. But let's hope it's gonna go well. So you can see everything here, right? The editor is Sublime Text 2. It's a nice editor. If you haven't chosen your favorite editor yet, check this out. If you have a favorite editor, check this out. It's fast and it has cool stuff. But let's not go into that. These are just my kind of stuff I was experimenting with, so just ignore that part. The source, let's take that one. It's gonna show us a little bit better what it is all about. This is the whole tree. We have a main.js file here. Then we have some styles, we have the router, and then all libraries go into lib. We have a separate folder for collections, models, templates, and views. This one could be outside of this source folder, but because I was doing this kind of late, I didn't pay much attention to it, so it just happened to be here. But yes, the templates and styles can be in a separate folder outside of the source folder. And if you do something that goes into production, you should minimize this anyways, so having these ones outside of the source folder is a good idea. So this is a little bit about the file structure. It's nothing I feel religious about. I hope you don't either. In some projects you can have a saying in how the file structure is going to be, and then there are projects where you don't have a say in that. You just have to abide by the rules. But usually you're going to find something like this in a project that is using Backbone or some other MVC star framework in JavaScript. So let's start with looking at the index.html file. Not that one, this one. This is probably normal stuff for you, nothing special, but this one is interesting. What it says is load this JavaScript, and then it has a data main attribute, main.js. This is the bootstrapping of the whole application. And then we have some HTML. So let's take a look at main. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to tell require.js where are you going to find everything. So we're going to say that, hey, if I put Backbone in a require, then I'm in this library here. And if I say jQuery, I'm in this one, and then, well, you get the general idea. And then we have require, give me this stuff, and then we have a function, it's a callback. When this is loaded, require is inserting them as parameters to you in that order you have given here. And then we're going to do some console log so that we know what happened. In production, strip that out. During development, logging is a good idea. If you prefer debugging instead, use breakpoints. I use logging quite a lot. I find it faster. Do what you feel is the most efficient way to accomplish what you're doing. And then we have this web app. It's an object which has two fields, views and collections. Those objects are empty. And then I'm making an array called authors and I deliberately put number 2 before number 1, and then I'm bootstrapping the collection, and then I'm just saying, hey, I did a router. Oh no, I'm going to do a router, and then I'm creating the router here. And in Backbone there's a gotcha. It took a while for me to realize that after you have an object, a router object, then you can access this history object in Backbone. It's not there before you create the router. So if you decide to use Backbone, remember that one. And then we have some magic to intercept links and navigate to that URL. Nothing special. Any questions? Yes.
Will you be putting that example somewhere so we could look, or is it too risky?
It depends. If you're nice to me, if you have a lot of questions, then I might be nice to you and put it on GitHub. Yes, I have to think about it. Yes?
Why do you put backbone and underscore and type it in window object?
This one. This is unnecessary. I can remove these 3 lines of code. Also this one. I put them in the window so that we can look at them in the browser. It's just for development. Globals, you should avoid them, but you can put them inside one object, and then it's kind of okay. Because, well, if you do something like my app that nobody can ever conflict with 1, 2, 3, 4 AC, then you know it's not going to conflict with anything. And well, the only reason why globals are bad is because, well, you can get conflicts. But let's just call it web app. And require is a good framework to use, because then you can abstract away parts that somebody else has written. For example, backbone jQuery underscore, they don't pollute my global space at all. In this example, they're all just here. And then I decide to put them into the window. Yes, the question was Backbone has to use this special AMD version so that it doesn't pollute the global space. Well, I was hoping you wouldn't notice, but jQuery is also polluting the global space. I think Require 2 has a feature that you can shim it away, and then it's not doing that nasty stuff. Yes. So everybody, if you want to ask something about Require.js, look up that guy. Go ask his phone number after this session, and then you just phone him in the middle of the night the day before the deadline. He's going to be pleased. Anyway, I don't think it's so bad if you have global variables. I try to avoid them because they can cause nasty stuff happening. But hey, as long as it works. So now we have bootstrapped our application. Let's take a look at the router. We pass on this my app object to the router, and in the router, in here we get the object, and then we just put it into this. And now I can probably show you this. Yes. So we define a few routes. We have our initialization function, and if the URL is matching with this one, let's call show author, and this part is going to be passed as an argument to that. Do some logging, and then because we have this kind of application variable here, we can access the model that we want to use. And then, because I bootstrapped this, I know it's there. It can't be, it has to be there. So it's not possible for me to get something else that isn't there. If you take it from the REST API, you should be aware of the fact that the model might not be there, and you need to do some callback logic there. But that's not the big thing. Okay, so what we do here is we check that, hey, we haven't used this view yet, and then let's require the stuff we need to do this view, and that's this is the view author view file. Let's load the file, then we get the view back so that we can create a view. Let's give it a model, this one that we just took from the collection. And then we're adding, if it's removed, let's do this logging and then navigate to index. And this trigger part, that is important if you want the router to actually trigger this line here. If you put trigger false, then the URL will change, but it won't fire this function. And then we're calling render, show it to us, and then we're being smart and putting the view inside of this global, or should I say semi-global web app object. If we happen to have this view already, then let's just change the model and render it. There's no need for us to create several instances of the same view. And well, the default is doing basically the same thing. The difference between this one and this one is that our model in this case is a collection. We have all the authors here, but we just call it model and it will work fine. So let's take a look at this example first. It's this file. We define, hey, in this module we're going to use underscore, we're going to use backbone, and then we have this text plugin so that we can get HTML files. If you do some production code, I don't recommend you using this one, because you can minify it basically by doing this on your server beforehand. And then you just kind of say that, hey, this is my template, and you don't need to compile it here. Underscore comes with a micro template in engine. That's why I'm using it here, because I didn't want to add an external template engine. I recommend you use something else, something a bit faster, but the general idea still applies. compile them in advance, then you'll get a more performant application. Then Backbone has this built-in functionality of events. You can say click and then say, hey, if somebody clicks a button.add, that's a button with an add class, call this function. A word of warning, if I would leave this out, this example would still work until you have two views at the same time. And because I'm not destroying views, that happens as soon as I go to the other view. So that's something to remember, especially if you decide to continue to develop something based on this code. So you should be careful. If you do not want to kind of think about that stuff, feel free to destroy the view, but remember you need to unplug all your references as well. This is a comment just for the ones that put their hand up in the beginning at the end of this questionnaire, those that know closures and self-executing anonymous functions. If you have a reference to something in the DOM, you're basically building a memory leak, because when you have a reference somewhere and that something has a reference back to you, then you have a circle reference, and because the other thing is in the DOM, they're in separate heaps in the browser. So you should be really careful when you have attributes, variables that are pointing to the DOM. In this case, we're never going to destroy the view. So when you close the browser window, we're destroying the views, and then you don't really have to think about this memory leak stuff. But if you decide to start destroying the views, then you need to clean up after yourself. If you Google this topic, then you'll find a lot of blog posts about it. It's not a big thing, but you need to be aware of it. In the init function, we bind render to this so that we can call this render anywhere, and it will work. This is also for the more advanced guys. This is a bit tricky because you can lose context. You lose context, for instance, in set timeout or set interval. Then you need to do a proper call to bind this again, and that's what bind all is taking care of. So you don't need to wonder about that one. Then we put, this is the observer pattern. We observe a change event from the model in the view. So if the model changes or is destroyed, then we render. And the render is quite straightforward. We ask the DOM for the HTML element. We say put this thing into that element. Sorry?
If you trigger the destroy event, it will crash because your reference key of model to JSON inside the render, and the model no longer exists if it's destroyed.
Yes, that would be absolutely correct if this model would actually be a model. But as you remember, because you're the smart guy here, our model is a collection. And we're not destroying the collection, we're just destroying a model in the collection. Because the events are bubbling up to the collection. So when a model is destroyed in the collection, the destroy event is bubble up to the collection, which, because I just want to tease you a bit, decided to call model. Now, the real reason was because model is built into the view, so I thought it would be a nice way to efficiently avoid it. But yeah, you could call this collection as well, and then in it you have you could also do something like this. This dot collection equals collection, and then you just pass the over here when you give, nope, not there, here. At this point, instead of decorating it, you would just say, well, let's give model. And this model, of course, is a collection as well. And you would call this collection as well. And now you kind of follow the logic a bit better. But I'm not going to be brave enough to change that, because something might break, and well, that's not nice to me. And if you're not nice to me, I'm not going to be nice to you, and if I'm not nice to you, you're not going to have this example for your exercises or project or whatever. I don't know. What do you have to do in this course? Just sit there and watch guys like me talk for a long time. Well, okay, we've just sitting here for an hour and 12 minutes or so. But hey, you're warming up. It's kind of good. I don't know about the other lecturers. Did they have like some rock band or something warming you up? Or I don't know. But hey, I'm doing my best. But let's get back to this example. So it was a good point to point out that, yes, if this would be a model, then this would break because, well, there isn't a reference to anything here. So the decent thing to do would be if this dot model equals, let's say, yeah, it's going to be undefined, but undefined is a bit problematic. So you need to do undefined somehow like this. Satisfied? Great. Now let me explain to the rest of you what just happened. This is the equal operator, and it looks funny because JavaScript is a funny language. It looks like C. It's not C, but it looks like C. Its name is JavaScript, but it doesn't relate to Java in any other way than in the name. And equal, this one roughly works the same way as this one, but this one also wants the type to be true. So if you're comparing something like, well, I can take the browser for this instead. I like Firebug, I like Firefox, I use Chrome sometimes. I'm probably going to use Chrome a lot more because it, well, in the recent update it got a lot of nice cool features, such as you know when it's reflowing and repainting, stuff like that. But I started to learn this stuff when Firefox was the browser and Firebug was the tool to use, because Internet Explorer, well, developer tools, you know how that is like. Well, hopefully not, because it was terrible. Just awful. I hope there's nobody from Microsoft in the audience, but if there is, I'm gonna go out that door, so just run really, really fast. For the rest of you, I'm going out that door, so protect me. So if you have something like 1 equals 1, well, that is true, of course. But then if you have 0 equals empty string, that is true as well. But it's not true if you do this. And, well, the length of the string is 0, so that's why this is true, I think. Something like that. The way JavaScript is changing the variables, it's not so intuitive. There's a great video on YouTube called WAT. If you Google it, you'll find it amusing. It's just some of the quirks that the language has. I still think it's a great language. So try to use this instead of this. You'll have less amount of bugs. And yes, I'm just trying out Sublime Text. I'm gonna purchase the license. I didn't do it before this because I wanted to show you that it is fully working without a purchase, and of course I would like you to use it. So without that nag screen, I wouldn't have been able to tell you that. It's a great tool. This part, this is the funny thing in JavaScript. Some people use undefined like this. That's a bit dangerous, because, well, if you use a variable that is undefined, of course its value will be undefined. This might just as well be anything I can think of, and it would work equally well. Yes.
If you want readability, there's also this undefined function in underscore.
Yes. Well, it looks ugly. Yeah. But yeah, underscore is a good way, because basically what they're doing is this. And I'm sure of that, because if I would be using something like undefined, and then there's this like super clever guy, and he's doing something like undefined equals true, for instance, or whatever. This isn't gonna work anymore. It's gonna break, because, well, this one obviously isn't. This one is undefined, but this one isn't undefined because, well, this guy just decided to be nice to you. But hey, at least you're asking questions, and I like that. So I'm almost smiling. And that's why I'm telling you these small tricks of the trade. Yes, is undefined. Was it like this? Something like this. Yeah, it looks much better. Yes, that's true. And half of the audience just didn't understand that last thing. well, it doesn't matter. You can watch the video afterwards, and these guys, let's ask them to stand up at some point, and then you can bug them for the rest of this course. They obviously know this stuff. And then let's look at the events a bit. If you click a button .add, let's call add author. And then again, so that we can see what happens, we have a console log, and then we take the fields from the form and then we validate it. And then if it doesn't work, we put an error. This was the only styling I had. And it's much better to add a class, because then the styles are in here. The other option would be to add something like I don't know if this is exactly true, but something like this. Background color red. Not sure if it went completely right, but something like that. I just use classes, so I already forgotten that thing. But that's another way to do it. This is a better way. Of course, you can do whatever you see fit. Or ask these guys, they seem to know a lot about this. And then when the model validates, we add it to the collection, and then we render. And that is the index view. Well, we just happen to know that this is never going to be undefined. Well, it doesn't do anything. It's not updating anything. So basically it will just, it will be left behind. But if somebody takes away your collection, then, well, it's already broken your app. So, well, of course, what you can do here is you can create a new model. Or actually, we should do something like... what you're saying is this. Yeah. Or trigger. I have no model / collection. That's probably a better way to do it. Let's just let somebody else take care of this. It's going to be the router's responsibility to add the model to you if it's not available. But then you need to be careful how you start to trigger stuff, because if the model is being fetched, you don't want to start to trigger a lot of events. But yeah. Let's just leave it at that. And now let's go back to the router. We have our view, we have the on remove, oh sorry, that was the wrong one. We have our collection here, we give it to the index view, we have the render, then we store it, and everything is nice. Now let's look at the collection. I think is this one. This one has a dependency. It needs the author, which is the model. And then we have the REST API so that we can access it. Then let's bootstrap the data. And if we don't get anything, this should probably be is undefined. Then we do a fetch. Right. Yeah, but the rest, it wasn't so readable, you know. So this is a better way to do it. And if we have the models, then it will be bootstrapped by default. Well, we have this get by ID. That's just a way to access the models, and then we have this comparator so that it's ordered according to the idea. It could be name as well. I usually use item in these. It's just my own preference. You can use whatever variable you like. I tend to try to avoid to use variables that I'm using in some other context. For example, I would be a very bad one because I usually use that in loops. So item is okay. And in this case, model would have been also fine, but because I have this .model here, I don't want to reuse that variable. JavaScript is scoped, so if I would define model here, it would override in this function the model call there. But you don't need to worry about that in this case. Then let's look at the model's author. It's basically this. We have the defaults. We have the same URL. It means that Backbone can retrieve the, I think it will mean that. I haven't tested it because I don't have a REST API. But you, depending on how you want to use it, you can skip this one as well. If you have this, it's enough. Then it will just work. And then if it changes, I'll just logging, hey, this changed. I don't have the UI for that. I had to skip something so that I could get some sleep. I think it would have been a very boring lecture if I would be sleeping right now. Then we have validation. We get attributes. ID cannot be null. It cannot be empty. Sure, I should trim this. I should trim this as well before I check. But this will work for me. It's a bit rough around the edges, but this is also just an example, so I don't think it needs to be 100% accurate in every aspect imaginable. So what we now looked at is the collection. We looked at the model. Oh, sorry, that was the wrong part. It's inside of this one. Yes, here's the model. And yes, this is the way I'm getting the model out of the collection, and then I'm passing it into the view like that. this is the template for, let's go this way. This is the template for the collection. So authors is a collection. Actually, let's go back a bit here. Let's look at the render function. First I have this template. It's templates index. It looks like this. We're using this variable called author. We're looping this array, and well, this might look funny to you. This is not the most common syntax for a loop, but this is the most efficient way to do a loop, because this one, this dot length, it's only accessed once and then it's reused after that. If this would be something in the DOM, it would be re-evaluated every single time you loop it, and that's slow. You should avoid that. If you're looping something in the DOM, take it out of the DOM. Don't keep it in the DOM. Make a copy. Clone it using underscore, for example. Because if you don't clone it, everything you do to that object will be updated interactively all the time. Every single thing you change in it will trigger, well, depending on what you do, but if you do some massive changes, then it will cause a reflow in the browser, and well, it's gonna be really slow. So use this instead. The reason I'm calling it island is because, well, I had a situation where I had 3 of these. Well, I, J, K, okay, it works. But then I had len in all of them, and I was like, what should I do with this? Well, this is jlen and this is klen. No, it's nice. But then somehow, somewhere, for some reason, as you can see right now, these ones aren't exactly working. These were len at the time, so I just forgot about them. So this would obviously not work as it should, because, well, the length of this is not the length of this, and well, that's the reason I decided to kind of improve my coding by using island, because then I know every place where I use I need to change that. And I think it looks okay. And then another thing that it's a small optimization again. Let's take the element out of the array and access it directly in all places. The difference is small, but if you have a large set, then that small difference will start to count, and if you do it a lot, it counts even more. So just small tricks again. You don't have to do it. You can do this the traditional way, which is approximately like this. This will work just as fine. Most cases it will be equally fast. Some cases it will be a bit slower. In some cases it's going to be a lot slower. Yeah, but this is a template, and the ground rule was don't use logic in that, and logic includes libraries. If you have a templating engine that supports it out of the box, like Mustache, yes, use it. Mustache will have it will use the native functions if they are available, and if not, it will gonna emulate it using this for loop structure. But in this case, we're not using an efficient engine, we're just using a micro template, so all logic away. But you're right, you're using a library, preferably the template engine library is a good idea. Okay, so we have the template there, and then, well, let's look at the other template as well. It's a lot more simple. It's just a name and then a button, and well, that was all I needed. And this is, by the way, what it looks like in the browser. So what we can do is we can click this link and we can kind of emulate, hey, let's remove it, so that we can see that it's, we got the remove author console log, then we're triggered within this view, and then the router takes us back to the index, and the index is rendering, and it has a model, and this model is of course the collection. And then we can add stuff. Oh, we need to add something here as well, and then we get it there. I don't have implemented the actual code to remove something, but you can do that on your own. The place where to do it is here. I think it's gonna be something like this dot destroy. Nope, it's not. It's this model.destroy. Let's try that out. You probably noticed the URL is a bit ugly, like that. It doesn't have to be. You can enable push state history, and then it's gonna just work as you expect. And that's how we enabled destroy. And there was one more thing. It was this one. Let's change it. Let's create tree test. All right. So now let's change it to Mikael instead. What you asked, why did I put it in the window? Well, it is because this one, now I can access the web app from the console. So what I'm saying is, take the collections, take the author collection from that at the first spot, which is gonna be Oiva at this, in this case, set the name field to Mikael. And now it's changed. But we also got this change triggered event, which is here. So if you need to do something when a model has changed, you can do it over here inside of the model. And because we used set, it's revalidated, and if we would have put in something else, then the validation would have failed and it wouldn't have changed. I think that is about it. Yes, that was all those slides. Let's go back to PowerPoint because we can continue from this part. Yes.
Could you actually make that set something which looks often a lot like Java, look like an ordinary assignment? Is there some tools in JavaScript to make that?
Now I don't quite understand the question.
Okay, there was did that set name of the.
Let's go back. It's going to be much easier for you and me to understand each other.
That set name, Michael.
Yes.
Could you make that the authors dot at 0 dot name equals Michael, and make that work as
This is Java. Oh, okay, so the question is, can I change this set function to work that if I directly do an variable assignment to it, and then it would kind of listen to the change and then trigger the same event? This is JavaScript. Of course, it's doable, but it basically means that you'll have all the variables everywhere, and then you'll need to kind of figure out a way how you can compare them, and then when you realize these have changed, then you trigger the event. So sure, you can do it if you have a lot of spare time. I don't know why you would like to do it. This is like 3 letters more. A few.
It's not about the verbosity. It's just like.
You're talking about syntax.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. But the thing is that each language has their own syntax, and you can try to fight it. You can do even classes in JavaScript.
My question, I'm reading the answer that no. This is the JavaScript way, and you do it this way.
Yeah, in Backbone you do it this way. But we're talking about two completely different things, because in Java you don't have variable change listening per se either.
The comparison to Java was only due to the fact that the tradition to use set something, or what methods that have names set this and set that.
You mean like object dot set name?
Yeah.
Of course you can.
That's equally often. That was my.
So you were going after something like this?
Exactly.
Yeah, we can do that, but we're gonna not. Then you have to trigger the event separately.
Okay, yeah, that was my point. There's no like manageable way of getting hook to that assignment.
Well, we talk about this.
With what?
Couple about tricks, it's doable, but it's not.
Yeah, it's insane.
I'm reading that. Yes.
I don't quite understand why would you like to. Because okay, let's just do a kind of mind thinking thing here. If you can do something like var test equals object, boom, okay, now let's have a name for that thing. It's my name. All right, now if we would have put in a listener to this object, and I do something like this other name, and this would fire, well, whatever you like it to fire. Okay, in some cases you want to react to that change. But then there are cases where you don't want to react to that change. So then you would have something like, I need to add here some way to not trigger the event.
Yeah, of course.
So you would need a way to say, hey, don't trigger that. And this is the part where it becomes ugly, because then you need to do something about the syntax. And, well, why do it difficult when you can just, hey, if I want to do this, I do this. If I want it to trigger something, I use this function instead. Get my point?
Yeah, perfectly. That's you actually there was a second time you answered my question, so it's perfectly clear now.
Yeah, well, the reason I'm kind of picking you as my target for this whole thing is that you were brave enough to ask a question, and that question was actually really, really good. Because you need to think about these things a little bit further, and not just that one step. You need always to think about the next one as well. So that was an excellent question, and I wanted to make it clear to everybody else why it was a good question. So sorry for kind of putting you on the spot and so on, but I think it made this lecture a bit better.
And if you read on the backbone documentation, it actually keeps all the variables in this model.attributes object.
Yes.
You should never actually touch that.
Yeah. But in the beginning, when we were kind of raising hands and stuff, in the end, not a lot of hands were raised. So my target for this audience was kind of good, because you're not like this super advanced guys that wouldn't even be here because you already know, except these two guys. But if I would have made a lecture where we would go through all of that stuff, we would be here tomorrow. But yeah, as he's pointing out, in Backbone you have everything there. We can check it out over here. This is everything we have in a Backbone object. And previous attributes is the one you're referring to, or attributes. Yes. So, but I think these are, there's some logic behind this, and I think it's related to set. If I change this one, I doubt that one is going to change. But of course,
Written documentation should be only used like read-only, never write any attributes.
yeah. But we can still do it. Yes?
Yeah, just to clarify, so the thing which we, if you can show the code again, the thing which we get out in the web app.collection.authors.@0, it's basically a backbone model, if I'm correct.
Yes, it's a collection. Yes.
It's a collection. I still can
Sorry.
collection out of them.
Sorry. This is the collection, and you're correct. This is the model.
In this, you would have to know that even though you can access the attributes, if you change them through the attribute, it won't fire the events.
Yes.
I think that was the question, that since we already know that this is like a backbone model, why would we like to change the variables or the attributes without firing those events? And in that sense, I don't think it would be nice that if you just assign a new value, it would fire the events, because it's a backbone model object, not a random JavaScript object. But of course, I suppose that's a design decision made by the backbone people. But just to argue your impression that why write it like that, because when you have the set method available, it's like you have to have a context. You have to understand that I'm dealing with this kind of object, and since I don't really see. Do you see any reason why I would like to change backbone model properties without firing events?
So the question is there a circumstance where you would like to change the attributes of a model without firing events? Sure. One example is where you set 10 values. You want to set the 9 first ones without triggering anything, and then when you do the 10th, you just want it to trigger once. Why you would like to split it up like that, don't ask. I'm just giving you a counter argument. It's insane. Usually you just kind of dig out all the variables and then you just put it in a single set. But the flexibility is a key element. If you have whatever reason, if you decide I need to be able to do this, you can do it. We're not restricting you. And that's one of the selling points as well. Yes.
I guess one real world usage is that, so in the set you have the silent attribute, so it won't trigger events. And the real world usage you have like 5 views set into a single model. So maybe you don't want them to update now, so you know that you changed it now, but you know that you will change it again in a couple of lines, so you don't want to change all the 5 views immediately.
Yes. Yeah. The comment was that if you have several views attached to the same model, you might want to trigger them separately or just manage the triggering yourself. All right. That was a good question and a nice discussion. Good work. Any more questions? Then let's go back to our favorite software. The benefits of a single page app. You usually use Backbone to do something more complicated, such as a single page app. And then you get an application look and feel. Well, the look you get by using CSS, but the feel you get from using JavaScript. And if you have the data available, you can do transitions. If you have a traditional web page, you cannot do transitions. It's just impossible because the browser is getting the new page from the server, and while it's loading, it's just waiting. And you can also hide the network latency a bit, which means you can ask for the next piece of data before you actually need it. And all of these tricks will lead to a better user experience. It will be the application will feel that it's much faster than it might actually be. It reduces the server load because you're not asking for completely rendered pages. You're just asking for the building blocks for that page. And if you already have some of the blocks, you don't need all of them again. And then it's scalable because every client has resources to do calculations, so you don't have to do that on the server. So if you get, let's say, 10,000 concurrent users, your backend will still survive. But if you're trying to render the pages with 10,000 users concurrently, you're going to need a really, really big server farm to be able to do that. And then you can do offline apps with it as well. You just store the data locally, and then you can access that data even when offline. But you're going to talk about this more in the following lectures. So, any more questions? Yes.
When using MVC, how does Google see the page? Do you need to do some kind of search engine optimization?
SEO is a nice question. It depends. It depends on how you decide to implement it. If you use the hash bang, which I had to do because, well, browser security, blah, 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 you can't push state in a local file, for example. It's some security thing, I don't really know. But basically, if you have the hash bang, there's ways how Google will index it. You can, it's called Ajax crawling. It's a way how you give Google the data, how the fragment works, and then it can crawl it, and it will still be found on Google. Something we've been working on is making the pages available using that same URL in the backend. So it doesn't really matter if you're in the front or back, you're still going to get the same page. So the crawlers, Google will see the thing in the backend. Yes.
A question on what backend framework supports this kind of thing the best way? I mean, you still need to have the models in the backend. You still need to do the validation in the backend. I asked the same thing in the rest lecture. But so in order you don't have to write the same kind of validation in both client side and server side, what are your opinions? What are the best frameworks which support this?
Good question. Next. No, just kidding. I had to use that reference. It was in the GRID's presentation. I don't know if it's if you've seen it, but the question is when the presenter says we did this with Node.js, and then where did you host your Node code? He's just asking. Good question. Next. Google doesn't offer public Node engines. It would be cool though. The question is if I make it a bit simpler, which framework supports this kind of structure with the least amount of effort? You agree on the new formulation? Yes. So we have JavaScript in the front end. And then we have a REST API to the backend. And that's our constraints. My recommendation is use JavaScript in the backend. Of course, you can, if you're familiar with Python, use Python. If you're familiar with C#, use C#. The language is not so important here. You have 3 things that you need to reuse. It's the model view and the controller. And well, all of these languages are quite similar, so porting them from one language to another is not a big thing. If you want to avoid that portation, then just use the same language. You can use the same models and views and collections and routers in the backend as in the front end if you use JavaScript. So if you have Node.js in the backend, you can reuse your code in the front end. It has a few tricks you need to master, but it's doable. I can explain it further if you like.
Well, I think I got the gist of it. I was just thinking that since there are some big frameworks like Ruby on Rails and Django, which are being used, and I really, when I look about this, that I usually have to find some third-party applications which do some kind of thing that they convert the logic from the Python code already to JavaScript, and because by hand I don't want to do that, I wouldn't want to do that.
Yes.
So that's a big, so when like a single person project, it's a kind of battle, and will I go forward with this kind of layout, because I would have to write duplicate places to the validations and stuff like that, and it takes time. And I really like to know what would be in the long run the fastest way to do it. Maybe Node.js
JavaScript is the fastest way to do that, because then you can reuse your assets. Same assets will work in the backend and in the front end if you decide to build your architecture like that. Any other questions? Good question, by the way. It's one of my favorite ones. All right. Thanks for listening. My name is Mikael Blomberg, and I'm a senior developer at SC5. Thank you and good night.